But for tonight, we're going to go back to these 50 characteristics, and I want to talk on some really heavy but very important characteristics that come out of complex trauma. And they kind of all go, the first ones go around an understanding of complex trauma that one way to define it is it's a child that didn't get their needs met consistently. So whenever a child doesn't get their need for safety, their need for love, their need for protection, their need for acceptance, if those needs aren't met consistently, that's complex trauma. So complex trauma always has an element that relates to human needs not being met. The question we're going to look at tonight is, how does it affect a child to not have their needs met? What has to happen in their brain in order to survive living in an environment where their needs aren't being met? So that's what we're going to dig into. And like I said, these are heavy ones. We could talk a whole series on each one. I'm going to try to just do a summary tonight, and then we will come back to them at a later date and explore them in greater detail. But number one, if you're in an environment where your needs aren't getting met, you will end up feeling hurt, and you will end up feeling pain, and you will end up saying, don't trust anybody. Because if you trust people to meet your needs, and they don't, then you will be hurt, let down, and go through a lot of pain. So the way to survive in an unsafe environment where your needs aren't being met is just don't trust anybody. And I would say that everybody I deal with, trust is a big issue in their life. And so that's what I want you to think about with me just very briefly. Because what happens in that child's mind goes like this. If I can't trust people to meet my needs, that means the only person in the world I can trust is myself. And that's how they try to live their life. And what you're going to see is that doesn't make for very good intimate relationships, and it doesn't make for very good recovery. So we ought to think through this trust thing. So let me give you an illustration I use all the time. But let's say it's you as a child, and you're standing on the roof and you're afraid, you don't know how to get off, the ladder fell over, or there's no ladder, whatever. And let's say I'm your dad and I come out and say, jump, I'll catch you. So as a child, you're very trusting and you just jump, expecting to land in my arms, and I move out of the way and let you fall. But that is what happens in a complex trauma family. So then let's say as a dad, I go, sorry, you know what, I'm going to put you back up on the roof. I'll catch you this time. And you jump again because children are very forgiving, and children always keep their hope alive that I really will do what I say, and you jump again, and I don't catch you. How many times would it take for you to come to the conclusion it's not safe to trust? But let's say then that mom comes out and she says, don't worry about dad, I'll catch you. You jump, mom doesn't catch you. Or she catches you every third attempt. After a while, you go, you know what? It's much safer to go through life not trusting. Now, let's say you come into recovery after living that way, and you realize that if I'm ever going to grow, I got to trust somebody. I can't do this alone. And just trusting myself has led to a disaster. So let's say we bring the most trustworthy, reliable, wonderful person, and they say, jump off the roof, I'll catch you. And they can show you a resume where they've never dropped one person. But what's going on in your head? Not a chance, buddy. I've heard that before. And so trust, rebuilding trust becomes a very difficult thing to do, but very important. And so recovery, part of it for most people is learning who you can trust. Now, I've seen kind of two extremes happen. One is, I'm never going to trust anybody. Other extreme is you come into recovery and you hear, I got to trust somebody. So you're going to meet somebody, say, you look trustworthy, I'm going to trust you totally. And you get hurt again. And so recovery is learning who I can trust, number one, finding safe, reliable, healthier people, and number two, learning to trust not all in one jump, but learning to trust gradually. And that is an important part of the process of recovery. But then it goes beyond recovery. When I deal with clients around relationships, I go, what are the two main foundation stones of a healthy, intimate relationships? And it usually doesn't take them very long before they say, if I don't respect somebody, I'll never have an intimate relationship. And if I don't trust them, I'll never have an intimate relationship. Trust and respect. But if you spend all of your life not trusting anybody, but that's the necessary foundation stone for a healthy relationship, you're in trouble. So what a lot of people do is try to have a healthy relationship without trust. And it doesn't work. They then accuse each other of stuff. There's jealousy, there's control issues, etc. And so they quickly begin to realize, if I don't get this trust thing figured out, I'll never have a healthy, intimate relationship. Then there's another thing. In the problem, you broke people's trust. You promised them things, you lied to them. You didn't keep commitments. You said you'd never use again, and you used again. Now you have your family, loved ones. You say, I'm serious this time. And they go, yeah, we've heard that before. And what many people in recovery struggle with is 3 weeks pass and they're clean still, but nobody trusts them yet. And I go, you did a lot of damage. You don't repair trust in 3 weeks. And then I get a couple that will say, he cheated on me, or I cheated on them, and it's been 6 weeks of me being good. How come they don't trust me yet? And I go, you don't repair that kind of trust when you cheat on somebody in 6 months. It takes a long time. And so if you're not willing to accept that people are going to have to slowly get to a point where they trust you again, and you want them to be speeding it up, and you're impatient with them and mad at them because they're not trusting you fast enough, you're not going to do very well. You have to accept, I created a lot of damage and a lot of distrust. I won't repair it overnight. It will be a slow, very gradual character. That leads to the next thing. I ask people all the time, how do you know whether you can trust somebody? And they scratch their head. Because in the past, they've trusted people who were smooth talkers. Or they trusted people that kind of lit their fire and got them all sexually aroused. And then they said, I'll trust them. That blew up in their face. What are the criteria that is the basis of trust of a reliable person? And what it boils down to is what we call character. And what we mean by that is a person who proves to be honest, a person who keeps their commitments, a person who does what they say they will do. But more than that, it's a person who manages their responsibilities well. A person who they see you as an equal, not as underneath them. There's so many different parts that make up whether a person is trustworthy, and those are character qualities. So as you begin to learn how to trust, you then look for a person that proves to be trustworthy. You trust them for a little bit, just one little thing. If they prove to be trustworthy, you trust them for a second thing. You don't just jump all the way in. And if they prove to be trustworthy, you trust them for a little bit more. And you gradually build trust. Now, that sounds great in paper, but addicts aren't very good with patiently developing trust. So, what they would say to a person, or they would say to me, is, I want to trust you. Give me a written guarantee right now that you're trustworthy. And I'll go, you got to hang around and watch me and be with me. Okay, I better know by the end of the month. No, it's going to take longer than that. Well, I want an intimate relationship with that guy. Is he trustworthy? I go, check him out. Well, I better know in a month. No, you got to be patient. So trust requires patience. And that's where many of us struggle. So trust issues are huge, but becoming healthy requires learning with trust. So the final thing I want to say about it is this. If you're back on that roof and you realize this person on the ground has proven to be trustworthy in lots of little areas, now I have to take a risk and jump. That risk is scary. And you can talk yourself out of it, but you'll still be on the roof, and you will never grow beyond that point. And so there's an element of recovery that will require taking a risk with people you've checked out. If you don't take that risk, you usually stop growing. If you take it, you go to the next level of growth. Next issue. If you can't trust anybody, what then do you have to do in order to get your needs met? You have two options. Number one, you can become a master manipulator and get everybody, work everybody so that they meet your needs. And some of you have done that, and you could write a book on how to manipulate. Option two, be a control freak. Control everybody that comes into your solar system so that they do exactly what you want. That way you'll never get hurt and your needs will always be met. We're going to look at the problems of that, but most people with complex trauma have control issues. I don't know if you've heard the term for the new type of mother who is now called a smother. And that is they smother their kids so they don't make any mistakes. So they do exactly what mommy wants you to do. Or the other term is a helicopter mom who's hovering over their kids all the time. It's a control thing. What's behind that is fear. If I trust you, if I take away my controlling ways, you might make a mistake. You might hurt me. So to give up control means facing your deepest fears of either being hurt, disappointed, or having others fail. And so people develop ways of maintaining control because they're not willing to give it up. They're not willing to face their fear. So some control freaks use guilt all the time to get people to do what they want. So as soon as you say, I'm going to do my own thing, you lay a guilt trip on them. And then they do what you want them to do. So control will always have manipulation tactics as part of the control strategy. So you can use guilt, fear, anger, intimidation, and that is you better do what I want or else. You can use threats. You can use all of that stuff. Leverage. If you don't do what I want, I'll hurt you over here. You can inflict pain in different ways just so they know not to mess with you. You can withhold love so they do what you want, and on and on and on. Now there's a problem with that. If you're overly controlling, guess what you create? Nobody wants to be around you. What do your kids want? They want to do the exact opposite of what you want them to do. We talked about that last week, oppositional defiance. So what most control freaks begin to gradually realize, it may have worked for a few years, but now nobody wants to get close to them. Their kids don't want to be around. They're all alone. Controlling who? Themselves the ants around them, the mosquitoes, whatever, but they got to control somebody, they think. But it backfires. You create what you're trying to avoid. So control issues is a big thing, and what it leads to eventually is I got to face my fear and I got to learn to trust, or else I'll never be able to give up my control. Third thing, people from complex trauma do not handle stress well. They have major stress issues. Next to relationships, stress is probably one of the most common causes of relapse. Because you get so stressed out, your brain says, we need a little vacation here from all this stress. And away you go. So let me just talk about stress a bit because it's such a big issue. I find at React on a weekly basis, usually one of the clients wants to talk about the stress they're feeling and how they're starting to feel overwhelmed. It's such a common daily issue, especially as you get back into the normal, regular responsibilities of life. So stress basically is this. Every time I face a situation, a problem, an event in my life, it will require energy to deal with it, to get through it. It will require mental energy, emotional energy, physical energy. Everything we do requires some energy. What stress is that my gas tanks of intellectual, physical, emotional, spiritual are all near empty. But I still got the same responsibilities. I still got the same problems, and it is taking energy that I no longer feel that I have. An important distinction for people is eustress or distress. So eustress is stress from positive things. So let's say you're going to a celebration tomorrow for somebody with 10 years sobriety. And you're excited, it's a positive thing. But by the end of the night, you're exhausted. Because everybody wants to talk, and everybody's, how are you doing? And it takes energy to do good stuff. But then there's distress, and that's the energy from negative problems. And that has an extra sucking power of energy out of you. And it takes more energy to deal with problems. So let me take that to complex trauma. Do you realize that when a baby comes into the world, it has no natural skill or tools for handling problems, for handling stress? Every tool for handling problems, stress, has to be learned. And they learn it by being taught by parents, and by parents role modeling how to deal with life. What happens in complex trauma is the people who are supposed to be role modeling good tools are role modeling bad tools. The parents that are supposed to teach them aren't. And so they're not being supported, they're not being taught, they're not being helped. So they face problems, and what does the brain do when it doesn't have the skills, the tools, the resources to handle them? It goes into fight or flight. Because it says, if I stay within this problem, which is getting more difficult and more trying and challenging, it is soon going to result in me getting hurt. So I better get out of here, or I better fight everything. So complex trauma children have what we call a very low stress tolerance. So if you take a child in a healthy home, they will learn to tie their shoes. They will learn to brush their teeth. They will learn to eat with a fork or a spoon. They will learn skill after skill after skill to handle problems, to manage life. By the time they're 20, their toolbox is filled with hundreds of tools that are healthy tools. But let's say a child in complex trauma, they were taught basic skills for feeding themselves, dressing themselves, all of that. But nobody taught them how to handle painful emotions. Nobody taught them how to handle a bully or other problems in their life. And so let's say at age 6, 7, 8, somewhere in there, they just felt nobody gives me the tools to handle life at this age. So they begin to avoid. They begin to isolate, spend time in their rooms all by themselves, play video games so they don't have to deal with friends. They avoid, they isolate, they shut down because they don't have the tools. So now you come into recovery. What's your stress tolerance? The same as that 6-year-old child, because that's where your toolkit stopped growing. So you might be 40, but your stress tolerance is that of a 6-year-old. That's why stress is such a big trigger to relapse. Because as soon as you start to get back into life, and I have clients say this all the time, I can't wait to get my kids back. I can't wait to get a job. I can't wait to get my own place. And I go, that's fantastic, but do you have the tools to handle that? Oh yeah, I'm set. A month later, they're back and they go, I wasn't set. Raising kids takes a lot of energy and is stressful. And then if you had a job on that and maintaining a home on that, I just got maxed out. And they relapse. So you have to accept, wow, I got a lot of tools to learn for dealing with life. And if I don't learn those, I could put myself into a dangerous position very easily and very quickly. So that's one of the reasons you have to be patient with yourself in getting back into adult life. And it's not because you don't want to, it's because you're not capable enough yet. You're still vulnerable. And that's not a shame thing, that's a reality thing. And if you don't just accept that you need to grow personally, you'll fall flat on your face. Now let me say a couple other things. What I find with a lot of people that I deal with, clients on a regular basis, I'll say to some of them, what's your stress level like these days? And they go, oh, I feel great. And I'll go, tell me what's going on in your life. Oh, I'm having trouble with my parents. I'm behind in my rent. My car broke down. I got somebody mad at me. And you go, wow. They totally lost track of what was going on in their emotional world. They disconnected. And so I have to sometimes go through with them, what are the kind of things that cause us stress? So here's a very quick list. Any situation where you feel out of control or you don't feel you have power creates extra stress. Any situation where you feel overwhelmed causes stress. Any situation where you go into it and you don't feel capable, so you feel vulnerable, causes stress. Anytime you feel anxiety or depression, that causes stress because it takes a lot of energy. Anytime you feel threatened, not safe, or attacked, anytime there's conflict in a relationship, tons of stress. Anytime you go through a loss in your life or a separation in a relationship, or you just feel lonely, that causes stress. Anytime you go through a change, that causes stress. Anything that disrupts your normal routine is stressful. And in recovery, reminders of past events can cause a lot of stress. Now, some of you are sitting there saying, you're stressing me out. There's a test that has been done, and we use it with our clients, and it's a stress evaluation test. So you look at the last 12 months of your life, and you look at all the events that you've been through, And then there's a number value attached to each type of event because some are more stressful than others. And then you put that value there if you've been through that in the past year, and then you add it all up. And then there's a note on the bottom that says, if your total goes over 200, you are in danger of health issues and emotional issues. Do you want to know what the average number is for an addict in early recovery? 500. And most of them go, I didn't feel stressed. That felt kind of normal to me. And I go, okay, maybe we got a little bit of work to do on understanding self-awareness so this stress doesn't get into big problems for you. Now, the next thing with complex trauma, it's not just that we have stressful situations, we're our own worst enemy. We create stress for ourselves. So here's another very quick list. If you live with unrealistic expectations, you've just created stress for yourself. If you try to control others, your stress just went up. If you don't plan very well and you just fly by the seat of your pants or you procrastinate, your stress is going up. Maybe not right in this minute because you procrastinated. But tomorrow it's going to be worse. If you're afraid to say no or set boundaries, you got higher stress than most people. If you're involved in unhealthy relationships, you got more stress than people. If you're in relationships that keep going into drama or that create trauma and lack of safety, you got more stress than people. And if you're addicted to chaos, and every time you feel a little bored, you do something chaotic, dramatic, you got more stress than most people. All of that you brought on yourself. Down the road, we're going to do a whole series on stress because it's such a big issue and there's a lot of tools to be learned. But I just give you 3 growth tools for tonight as an overview. Number 1, to deal with stress, you got to learn boundaries, and we're going to talk about that. You need to develop structure and routine and get organized, and you need to learn how to care for yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. That's stress. Next. I always smile at this one. People from complex trauma tend to be more negative and critical than the average person. Maybe you never thought of that, but let me explain it and then give you some information around it. When you're living in danger, your brain trains you to look for problems, to look for negative things, because that's how it wants to protect you. If you can spot something negative, then you can protect yourself and avoid that. And so as soon as you go into a room or a new situation, your brain is not looking for the big picture, it's looking for potential negative. And that's how you've trained your brain. Now let me show you what happens when you get into recovery. Let's say you were to come to a brand new job, or you came to a treatment program, React, AFM, whatever. If you're a normal complex trauma person, you would come in and check it out, and if it looks safe, you would go and you would tell all your friends, this is the best program in the world. This is the best job in the world. I love it, I love it, I love it. 2 weeks later, this is the worst program in the world. This is the worst job in the world. What happened? So let me show you. I call it the 80-20 rule. So let's say you come to React. 80% of the program is fantastic, but 20% is there's humans that are there. And they're not perfect. And guess what your brain fixes on? That one problem that's bugging you. that one person that hurt you a little bit. But then what your brain doesn't go, it doesn't say, that's only one problem. The rest is great. Your brain says, let's obsess on this problem. Let's fixate on this problem. And then it grows from 20% to 30% to 40%. And pretty soon, it's 100% bad. That is what happens. So I have seen many people in recovery go from treatment center to treatment center, AA group to AA group, counselor to counselor, and it's always everybody else's fault. Let me say up front, sometimes it is other people's fault. But often, it's this negative, critical thing. They get one thing that bugs them, and that is the focus, and it grows to be everything, and then they quit. So, I got to clarify one thing. In recovery, you'll hear an expression that says, don't take somebody else's inventory. Or if you point out a problem, somebody say, oh, you're taking everybody else's inventory. Now, that could be terrible advice or good advice. So let me explain it. One of the important skills to learn in recovery is how to detect if somebody's a safe person or not, whether somebody's healthy or not. So you need to take other people's inventory to an extent, to a degree. You need to check out their character. The problem is when I get so obsessed and preoccupied with other people's problems that I forget working, I stop working on myself. That's when I've gone too far and into an unhealthy thing. So you need to learn, and the word is discernment, you need to learn how to check whether a person is healthy enough to be in a relationship with or develop some trust, or whether they're unhealthy, but don't become preoccupied with negative. One of the things that I say to clients on a regular basis is this. Most addicts, relapse is a process as well as an event. So there's dominoes that start to fall. One of the early dominoes for many people, and it's what I look for as a counselor, is when they get very negative. So all of a sudden they're negative about everything, they're finding fault with everything. That's usually a warning sign that their dominoes are starting to fall, and if they don't stop it, they could easily relapse. Great starters, poor finishers. A joke I say all the time, the greatest people in the world to hire for a job are an addict for the first week. Because that first week, they are the best employee in the world, wanting to impress you, excited, got all kinds of energy. And then after that first week, this is starting to feel like a responsibility. This is starting to feel boring. It's a routine. I don't like boring. And they lose interest and move on to the next job. Many addicts in early recovery, one of the hardest times to not lie is when you write your first resume in recovery. And they tell you, please list past job experience. And you say, do I put the last 5 years where I've had 25 different jobs that I quit after a couple weeks or a month? So what's going on there? There's a whole bunch of issues that are part of this great starter, poor finisher. There's something in complex trauma, and we talked about it, where you live for the moment. So everything's about instant gratification. Everything's about, is this giving me fun or pleasure? As soon as it feels boring, as soon as it requires commitment, as soon as there's a routine, something in me starts to lose interest. Another thing from complex trauma is many people coming into complex trauma have lived and survived with fantasies. And so it's always the knight in shining armor who's going to be perfect and make my life happily ever after. It's always going to be the new job that's going to be a perfect job, and then it's not. So they're a great starter until there's a problem or it's not perfect. That song that, that Diana ended with, I'll rise up. What that is really saying is, what many have said in recovery involves failure. Doesn't mean necessarily failure of a relapse, but it might mean that. But it means you're not going to do everything perfectly the first time. So therefore, if I'm going to make it in recovery, I got to rise up again and again, dust myself off, learn from it, and keep on going. Perseverance is what it's called. Stick-to-itiveness is another sophisticated term. But we have to learn, and this is what it boils down to. Complex trauma, I make decisions based on how I feel. So if I feel like doing something, I'll do it. If I don't feel like doing something, I won't do it. Recovery, maturity, says I'll do something because it's the right thing to do, regardless of how I feel. That is hard. Because you still got emotion saying, I don't feel like this, I'm mad, this is boring. And you got to get the thinking part of your brain to say, shut up, to the emotion part of your brain and say, I'm going to do this even though I don't feel like it because it's the right thing to do. It's the only way you'll make it in recovery. Next one, deep longing for validation. Complex trauma, what it does is when a child is neglected, they take it and they say it's because I have no value. When a child's abandoned, their brain says you must be worthless. And so a child grows up with this shame thing, which we've talked about, but it's a deep feeling of not having much value or no value at all. So another way to say it, and how I present it to clients, the term we use for humans is that we are a human being. What that means is just by being, I have value. I don't need to do anything. I have inherent, built-in value. So I am a human being. Complex trauma, I am a human doing. The only way I have value is if I perform. The only way I have value is I have to be doing something because it's the doing that gives me value. And that is a sad way to exist because you're always insecure. You're always wondering, am I doing enough? You're always comparing yourself to others, saying they're doing more. Uh-oh, I'm in trouble. So part of recovery is learning I have value apart from doing anything and learning to embrace the value and be a human being. Now let me show you how hard that is. What happens in a child who has no value is they're desperate to find a sense of value. So they will begin to look for things that cause others to value them. So a girl might have a great body and she gets lots of attention. And so in her mind, now the thing that gives me value is my body. Or you might have a guy that's very funny and everybody laughs. And he goes, oh, they value me for my humor, so that's what makes me valuable. So now in every situation, they got to crack a joke. Because that's all that gives them a sense of value. And then others, they learn they're a great athlete. They're a good musician. They can make a lot of money. They can get a degree because they got great brains. And they get their value from their brains, from their abilities, from their position, from their money. All of that is where they find their value. But you want to know what happens? It doesn't solve the problem. because they're still longing to be validated for who they are. And so what I find for a lot of clients is they're still looking for dad or mom to validate them. And they chase it and they chase it. And they tell them, I accomplished this, I did this, I got a raise, and they still don't get validated. And they fall apart over and over again. Part of what is important for them is to quit trying to get validation from people who are never going to give it to you, and learn to validate yourself and find healthy people who will validate you for the right things, not for what you do. And that's scary. So a lot of people say, I am not going to try and flaunt my money or who I know or my job as a way of getting people to respect me. I'm going to give up on doing that. And they meet friends and they're going, do they respect me? Do they respect me? Should I tell them where I work? And they just are torn up inside, and they go for a couple weeks and they don't get validated yet. And they go, oh, I can't live like this. I'm going to tell them I'm the president of this company. It is so hard to trust that others will eventually validate you for being you, not for what you do. Let me take that a little bit further. In a healthy family, a child is validated for who they are and when they do well. So there's a double validation. If a child makes a mistake, the parents say, you're still valuable, we still love you, even though you made a mistake. In complex trauma, if you make a mistake, you get told you're bad. So it wasn't that you just did bad. If you do bad, you are bad. So there's a blur. And so what you do is connected to your value. And recovery is starting to distinguish, again, who I am and what I do should be connected, but I have value just being me without doing anything. And that is such an important thing to learn.